Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wilson Center's Middle East Programs panel this morning, focusing on Syria after Assad, Syria in transition. My name is Marissa Khurma, and I'm the director of the Middle East Program. This past week, we have witnessed the fall of Bashar al-Assad, a watershed moment for the region, for Syria, but most importantly, for the people of Syria. There are, of course, lots of questions that come across the region as well as here in Washington, in the United States, about what the future looks like for the Syrian people. And here to discuss the implications, the challenges, but also the opportunities are a distinguished panel of experts, including first and foremost Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, chair of the Middle East Program at the Wilson Center, Henri Barkey, who is a senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, but also former director of the Middle East Program at Wilson, Oula Alrifai, who's assistant vice president of field and constituencies at the National Immigration Forum and has done a lot of work on Syria and the geopolitics of Syria. And last but not least, Marie Forestier, senior advisor at the European Institute of Peace. And I'm pleased to hand this over to my colleague, Youssef Chan, who's program director and analyst at the Middle East Program, to moderate today's discussion. Youssef, over to you.
Thank you so much, Marissa, for that great introduction. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'm Youssef, program coordinator for the Middle East Program here at the Wilson Center. And today we're going to be talking about Syria. As Marissa mentioned, it's a watershed moment, extraordinary moment, if not in the country. After 13 years of civil war and 5-decade-old dynasty, there's a new moment, a lot of opportunities, a lot of concerns about the future of the country and its people. So we have a lot of great topics to cover today in a short period of time. So I'm going to get into the conversation right away. And today I'm going to start with Oula. Oula, thank you again so much for joining us this morning. I want to hear your opinions about what do you think is happening in the region, what people are thinking in Syria, what people are thinking about their future, what are their concerns from Damascus to Aleppo to all over the country. It's still a very dynamic moment. A lot of actors are involved. So yes, please share your thoughts about this incredible moment in history.
So I'm going to be speaking today as a Syrian American and taking off all the other hats professionally. Honestly, it's been very hard to process. I've been processing for the past few days, as many of us Syrians. I left my hometown, Damascus, in 2005 due to direct death threats to my family. I grew up in a family that has suffered from Hafiz al-Assad regime and Bashar al-Assad regime all of my life. It's an extraordinary moment for sure. It's something that I haven't even thought I'm going to witness in my own lifetime, to be honest. Like my voice is shaky right now. Today is it's the first Friday of freedom for those of us and people who have followed the Syrian revolution, Syrian uprising since 2011. Every Friday was a day of protest around the country, peaceful protest for a long time. The violence started by Bashar al-Assad and his regime and his backers, and it was a very bloody civil war. Or actually, it was a war against the people of Syria. And today, if you just look online, on social media, on TV, people are celebrating. People are dancing in the streets. People are singing the revolution songs. Yes, the Syrians did topple Bashar al-Assad. So I'm gonna say to all of the martyrs and people that we have lost throughout the years, thank you. Thank you for what you did. You died so we can survive. You died for freedom. You opened a chapter for Syrians that no one has thought could happen. Like, so عاشت سوريا وسقط بشار al-Assad. This is one of the main revolution slogans. So long live Syria, and Assad is definitely is finished. Although there is a huge opportunity right now, and for a new Syria, free Syria for all, a new chapter after 60 years of dictatorship and bloodshed, and we need to make sure that we are working together as Syrians to prove to the world that we can achieve the dream that we have dreamed of for a very, very, very long time. Syria that is open, Syria that is diverse, Syria that is advanced, Syria that is strong, Syria that stands respects the rule of law, Syria that is respects human rights, women rights, minority rights, religious rights, ethnic rights. Syria that has peaceful relations with its neighbors in the region. Syria, we need to show the world how this is our time to prove to the Syrians themselves and to the international community that that we really won this fight. And thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you so much for for sharing your thoughts and feelings. I truly appreciate it. And I'm going to turn to Henri now to ask his approach to Syria, what he thinks about the situation from Damascus to Aleppo to the northern parts of Syria, where there's still a lot of tensions between different groups, including Turkey, Kurds, and other actors. So, Henri, thank you so much again for joining us this morning. Please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me. Look, as if I'm going to be a good political scientist, I have to be very careful as to what I say, because let's face it, what's happening today in Syria is really unprecedented, but it is also the result of unintended processes, unintended consequences of a whole series of things. When you think about why the Bashar Assad regime collapsed, it's yes, the fact that October 7 happened, the fact that Iran and Hezbollah decided to attack Israel, and eventually the Israelis came back and hit both of those. And yes, you can, but it is also a state that had completely corrupted from the inside, as we saw. I mean, there was nothing left to it. It just melted away. But what I would say at this stage is we're only at the beginning. We really know nothing. We don't know whether the winning organization, HTS, we don't know anything about its composition. We know maybe a few things about its leader, Jolani, but things are going to happen in the region which will engender counter reactions. And as a result, I think it's very difficult to predict. What is very important, though, I would say, and Jim, I'm sure will have to say something about this, that you need some kind of, shall we say, parental guidance. I imagine you would agree with me. And no, that's seriously. I mean, there has to be. I mean, the major powers have to be involved. They have to work help the process, because look at what's going on now in terms of the consequences of unintended developments. On one hand, you have Turkey moving against the Syrian Kurds. Mind you, these are Syrian Kurds that the Turks have targeted. The Turks will try to talk to Damascus, get an agreement with them. The Kurds themselves will talk to Damascus. Meanwhile, the Israelis are demolishing the Syrian military, and that itself will have unexpected consequences. So you have essentially two almost predators on both sides of Syria intervening. For each have legitimate reasons, we can argue, but that will have consequences. And what I'm saying is that we need to seriously think about where this goes, and we should not be surprised again. And I'll come back to it later.
Thank you so much, Henri. You gave me a lot of thoughts and actually questions that I'm going to follow up in a moment. But Maria, I'm going to turn to you now. You're joining us from Europe, and I want to hear your opinions on the matter on Syria, but also the perspective of European countries, European Union actors, because there's been a lot of discussions about the refugee question as well. If you can touch upon that I'd appreciate it, and we can turn back to that later too. But yes, please go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Yusuf, and thank you for having me. So I don't know if it's because I'm from Europe or based in Europe, but I would like to highlight the optimistic side of the events. We've heard a lot about the risks and what can go wrong, and all the negative aspect of this of what can happen. And I would like to highlight that also this is an opportunity to get things right and for things to go in the right direction. So far, there have been several positive signs from HES and the opposition. Minorities have not been harmed during the offensive, none of them. There have been deals that have been made with some villages where minority were, and HES didn't enter these villages. So overall, the takeover has been mainly peaceful, and that's something to acknowledge at least. And also, the initial decisions have been also quite encouraging. The new authorities have assigned themselves a time limit until March 1st for their caretaker government. So that's also, I think, unprecedented in transition. Usually, entities seizing power are trying to hang on to it as long as possible. So less than 3 months also could be acknowledged. And other many decisions, the amnesty for soldiers, creating police academy, hinting that the economy will be a free market economy. So this is encouraging. Still, we shouldn't be naive, and we need to see in the coming weeks, months, if this is implemented and other decisions, because there will be many challenges facing authorities. But I think this should be acknowledged. And another positive point for this transition to me is, and that is different from other transitions and conflict or post-conflict countries that Syria has been compared to recently, like Libya or Afghanistan. One big difference is that there is in Syria a vibrant and strong civil society. These past 12 years, the Syrian civil society has been very active, has built its capacity, its skills, and they are ready to play a role in this transition and contribute to it. So now about Europe perspective, I think as other actors, Europeans really don't know what to do at this stage. They have no idea. As you said earlier, Europe was reviewing its Syria strategy until very recently. They even canceled their latest meetings in Brussels on this as events were unfolding. As you said as well, migration and the refugee issue has been a key issue for Europeans in shaping their policy, mainly because of domestic concerns. So it is likely that in the near future it will also be a component. Another key issue is what to do with HTS. Should Europeans lift sanctions or not? And I think that's the wrong question. The question shouldn't be should they lift sanctions, but how to leverage lifting sanctions to continue the process that has been started in the right direction, and to consolidate the positive signs, to ensure that the governance is inclusive in Syria, that the transitional process is inclusive, leading to an inclusive governance. I'll stop there, but I'll be happy to elaborate further on Europeans' policy.
Thank you so much, Marie, for those comments. Truly appreciate it. And we're going to be coming back to some of the things you mentioned, including migration, but governance and leveraging economic sanctions. But before that, I want to turn to Ambassador Jeffrey. Thank you again, Ambassador, for joining us. Would you mind speaking to what's happening in Syria, to the U.S. perspective, to Israel's perspective, and potentially what Henri mentioned, the predators, the outsiders who can potentially damage the future of Syria? Would you mind speaking to that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Boy, I'm glad I went last. First of all, most of what I say will be a reinforcement and an expansion of what Henri said, because I agree with every single word. And as Henri knows, that isn't always the case. Secondly, with my other two speakers, I share the great joy, having been deeply involved in Syria for the last 6 years, joy of the Syrian people that this nightmare is over. We cannot underline too much that reality. And that gets also to our European colleagues comment that we can be optimistic. Not only have whatever the future holds, the Syrian people had a turning point that's dramatic, but more importantly, the region has. The Syrian revolution has been the culmination of a set of steps initiated in October of 2023 by Iran and its various proxies that took a set of bad decisions that have led to the collapse of the, if you will, Iranian axis or Iranian regional empire that has been, if not responsible, sharing responsibility for most of the horrors of the last 20 years in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Iraq. This is a tremendous step forward that we should build on. The fact that most of this since October 7th has seen a split U.S. policy where none of the things that happened the U.S. really wanted. It had a totally different approach to Israel and its enemies than the approach Israel took. But when Israel ignored the U.S., Bob Woodward's book, War, describes in detail every single step of that. The United States went along with it. Likewise, for 4 years, the U.S. was trying in the Biden administration to change the Syria policy we put together, which was freezing the conflict and keeping pressure on Assad, that we put together in the Trump administration. But for whatever reason, they didn't succeed, fortunately. Okay, that's the past. Going forward, let's put things in 3 categories, I'll call, and deliberately based on my twisting the use of the red lines from 2013. There are red line issues. There are magic wand issues, and there are operational diplomatic issues. The red wand issues are the things that are immediate, they're concrete, they basically allow success based upon classic diplomatic toolkits and actions, be they military force, threat of military force, sanctions, and basic diplomacy. These include, and we've already touched on many of them, working out some arrangement or reestablishing the ceasefire from 2019 between the SDF Kurds and Turkey. And closely related, ensuring that ISIS doesn't take advantage of this and that we continue to press ISIS. Then the chemical weapons need to be tracked down and secured. We need to figure out and to some degree rein in Israel on its activities to the extent it's planning on continuing to do things. It's hard to imagine more that it could do in the short term, but still that has to be watched. What we're going to do with HTS, both sanctions issues and the terrorism designation. And finally, the fate of the Russian bases. Looking a little bit beyond and a little bit more opaque is how to ensure that Iran doesn't claw its way back into Syria and into a supply capability to Hezbollah, because this whole thing has a huge impact on the just negotiated ceasefire in Lebanon. It increases the chances dramatically that that will be successful in the long term. The magic wand are all of the things we want Syria to become. Blinken is eloquent on that. We want a democratic, inclusive government. We want reconciliation, essentially all things that were laid out in 2254, the 2015 UN resolution, and that resolution and the UN role, at least formally in doing much of this, are still valid, and we need to focus on it. But these things are hard to do. It may be a bit, that's why I'm saying magic wand. They're long-term, and most of it depends on not us, but the people of Syria, but we can contribute. And there is some hopes. Iraq is a troubled country, not entirely, but largely because of the Iranian influence, and that is going to be relooked at by the Iraqi people very quickly. That's another impact of all of this. But despite even that, Iraq has achieved many of the things we hope to see in Syria. The country's been basically at peace for a long time, with the exception of ISIS, and the various ethnic and religious groups more or less get along in a more or less democratic system, stressed by Iranian encroachment, but nonetheless, if there's hope for Iraq, there's hope for Syria. Now, the operational, that's where we get to Henri. There has to be an adult. There's only one adult, the U.S. The various interests, potentially even the Russian on the bases, but certainly the Turkish interests, the Syrian, the Turkish interests, the Israeli interests, and the interests of the Arab states around Syria and more broadly in the region are not incompatible with each other. But the way people will try to maximize their interests without looking at the impact that has on the others can lead to major frictions or even conflict. Thus, it requires an umpire to play this role. This is great power diplomacy. It's not something we're used to, but it's something that only the United States can do. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. I actually want to follow up with that question, and if anybody wants to answer, that's totally fine. But I want to start with Henri, and Henri, especially with regards to these foreign actors who are involved with competing interests in Syria, including Turkey, Israel, but others as well. How can the United States, how can Washington play a role in this? And now that there's an administration change in the United States in a few weeks, there's going to be a lot of discussions about how the incoming Trump administration is going to shape its Syria policy, and there's a discussion of removing troops from Syria. So, how do you think that's going to play a role in the future with balancing those different groups of people with different interests? And these are not necessarily weak powers, but quite passionate and ambitious countries with strong agendas in Syria's future.
Look, the Trump administration, I mean, and the incoming president has said, look, Syria is not our problem. Let them work it out themselves. The truth of the matter is, the Middle East especially, but a place like Syria that borders on Lebanon, on Iraq, on Israel, on Turkey, is very quickly going to suck you back in, because you can't just ignore when you have a major conflagration or major problem emerge. So the best thing to do is to take preventive action, to get engaged, to prevent things from deteriorating. And as Jim suggested, and also I agree with Marie's optimism. I mean, there are ways to get out of this situation, and especially now, because let's face it, I mean, for the last 20 plus years, Iran created essentially a chain of fire, if you want, from Lebanon all the way to Tehran, and basically determined events in the region. So now that chain has been broken. So there is an opportunity to start and to rebuild. The issue with the Turks and the Kurds, let me just say a couple of things on that first. The problem is, the Turks say, well, the Kurds in Syria are terrorists because they're affiliated with the PKK, etc. The Syrian Kurds, as Jim will attest to you, and they are allies, they work with us, have never attacked the Turks. But in reality, that is not the primary reason why the Turks are opposed to the Syrian Kurds. They're opposed to because they're afraid that what happened after the Gulf War in Iraq will happen in Syria as well. What happened after the Gulf War? We, the United States, helped the Kurds in Iraq to assume a federal state. There is something called the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, which is a federal part of Iraq. That would not have happened, right, if it wasn't for the fact that the United States was somewhat the midwife there. We are involved in Syria, again, with the Kurds. And especially now in the aftermath of a regime change in Syria, there was a regime change in Iraq too, of course, that we will somehow construct another autonomous or federal arrangement in Syria. So if you look at it from the perspective of Ankara, to have a Syrian Kurdish entity in addition to an Iraqi one is a strategic nightmare, because guess who's next, right? They will think that the Turkish Kurds are going to go next. And Turks also, unfortunately, tend to make policy on the basis of paranoia and conspiracy. So they are convinced that there is a US-Israeli conspiracy to create a Kurdish state, not just in Syria, but also in Turkey, etc. So this is what they're reacting to. So the United States has to come in there and prevent the deterioration of events in the north from becoming a war. I don't think the ceasefire is going to hold because I don't think Erdogan believes in the ceasefire. So without the United States forceful intervention, there won't be a chance for at least the Kurdish issue to be managed in Syria. Oh, we lost Jim. Look, let me stop here because there's more to say. I can talk about the Israelis also later, but you have other guests.
First, thank you so much, Henri. I'm going to turn to Oula with the same question. What do you think about U.S. involvement, whether now or in the future with the new administration, not just regarding Turkey and the Kurds in the north, but in general with Israel, with Iran? There's a lot of actors, as I mentioned, involved in the conversation. What do you think about U.S. and Western involvement in general, not just U.S., obviously, because Europe is also going to have to be part of this conversation too?
Thank you. I do agree with the guests here on a lot of the issues that have been raised. I want to say that the time to move is now. So like adopting like a wait and see attitude that's just going to undermine any, being involved in any transitional process in Syria. And if the US really cares about its interests in the region, and its allies, they really need to have the Syrians be at the table. They need to discuss with them directly. They should work with the rebel leadership right now in HTS and other factions. It's not only HTS, by the way. So it's a complicated. There's the Syrian opposition outside. There is different factions on the ground. There's a multi. It's a coalition of groups that have been working together and now trying to put an agenda that is inclusive for all Syrians. So the US needs to be involved right now. You cannot just have discussions about Syria without having Syrians being part of that decision-making process. I need to make that very clear. So, and directly addressing Blinken and his remarks, lately, and also for the incoming administration, US administration. Definitely, there are threats. I've worked for a very long time on the Iranian threats in the region, and specifically in Syria. The Russian threat is not over. Russia can, it's now Syria is in a fragile state. Russia can easily take advantage again of those weaknesses. This is why I'm saying the US and the free world, our Western allies, we need to be really involved, and we can't just be talking, about, oh, Syrians need to do this and need to do that. We need to help them, guide them. That's what needs to happen right now. Definitely, yeah. So we acknowledge the threats, we acknowledge the weaknesses, but also there's a huge opportunity right now to turn the page, to start a new chapter for a country, as I said in my opening remarks, a country that respects the rule of law, a country that is free, democratic, pluralist for all Syrians, a country that has good relationships with its neighbors, Israel included, definitely, and the regional dynamics could be everyone. It's a win-win situation if the US helps lead and guide those discussions that are happening now behind the scenes about what is Syria going to look like in the next few years. So, and by the way, HTS has only like a few months, like Marie said, and then, they're not gonna until March, and then we should have a new body. So yeah, get involved now. That's my advice. And don't let elements of fear take over, because Syrians broke the barrier of fear, and they are the ones who were seriously afraid for 60 years to even say his name, Hafiz or Bashar. We are witnessing the horror that Syrians have lived under. If you are following the news of Sednaya prisons and other prisons, no one wants bloodshed. No one wants sectarianism. People are learning. Syrians on the ground are trying to learn from each other. And for the very first time in so many years, because we did not trust each other as citizens of the country there, because of Assad, now we're talking to each other. So it is it's a very different dynamic. I'm very hopeful, but also I'm cautiously optimistic because we experienced a lot of bloodshed, and also the meddling in our affairs was not, also led to a lot of horrible consequences. So yes, the U.S. needs to be helping with guiding Syria and Syria's new future.
Thank you so much, Ola. I truly appreciate your comments on this. We've often forget to elevate the voices that actually needs to be heard most times, especially in Washington. We do that quite often. Ambassador Jeffrey.
No, we don't. Well, hold on. No, we don't.
We can disagree on that, I guess, but
yeah, we're going to disagree on that.
Okay, that's totally fine.
Washington puts a hell of a lot of effort training tens of thousands of people in foreign languages to actually figure out what's going on the ground. The problem is the role Washington plays in the world, not just on this issue, which we're talking about today, but on 100 others, is extremely difficult. And what the voices of the people that you hear are tremendously contradictory, including Syria, and it's very hard to build a policy on that basis. But it's not because we're not listening to people, Yusuf.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that comment. I want to actually ask you the same question I asked Henri and Ola with regards to U.S. involvement, not just in balancing Turkey's or Israel's interests, but also with regards to the governance in Syria, because that's just as important as security, and governance is going to be one of the most important aspects going forward. And I'm going to turn with the same question to Marie in a moment too, with regards to governance and how Europe can potentially partake in that as well. But Ambassador, go ahead.
Yeah, this gets back to the magic wand. First of all, where Washington, in part because we hear so many not only contradictory views, but we hear people giving views that they don't really believe, but they think we want to hear. It's very hard for us to figure out what the Syrian people or the Vietnamese people or the Iraqi people want before we then go off and come up with a game plan to get what we think they want. And that's a problem. But as I said, it's very hard to deal with. If you're lucky, you have a process back and forth with the various groups in Syria while trying to encourage them to talk with each other rather than fight each other. And out of this, and again, we have the Iraq experience, which in many respects has been a successful experience. As I said, the major problem over the past 20 years has been Iranian encroachment on that process, not the actual effectiveness of the process once we got the surge. And we listen to voices. By far the most important example of that is a Grand Ayatollah Sistani repeatedly, at times even Muqtada al-Sadr, and obviously the Kurds and others. And so we're able to shape policies, but this is different. We were with the exception of Iran, the international community in Iraq. We'll have to learn this very different situation, and I can't think of a situation that we have been in. Our diplomacy is normally peer diplomacy with the Soviet Union or now Russia, or alliance diplomacy or client diplomacy. We're working with some client, Kuwait, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, that's under threat and dragging along the international community. But in this one, we are one, maybe primus among equals, but only one of a number of major outside actors. The three critical ones are the Arab states, Israel and Turkey, but Russia and Iran are also out there, and at some distance, but still important, the Europeans and the UN. And again, we, the U.S. as the leading country, that collection of other players internationally and the various groups inside Syria will have to try to figure out to what degree and how they will achieve these magic wand outcomes that will keep the country at peace, prosperous, and politically democratic and free. The only guideline I can give is what works in the past and what hasn't. Bosnia is the best example of what has worked. And there, the rule is we did ensure that everybody from the outside and everybody from the inside's interests were at least met to one or another degree by very strong leadership and very flexible leadership. But the second thing was, and this is critical, we mobilized the international community to speak with one voice, not only on what kind of a vision we had or we could support the people of Bosnia and now the people of Syria presenting, but also the carrots and sticks we would deploy to encourage or discourage action. We set up systems to control that so that it was very clear apart from, 1,000 calories a day in water, you don't get anything from the international community unless you're adhering to X, Y, and Z. This would get to the red lines I said on security, and more broadly, that you're making some kind of progress towards the magic wand. This is tough love. It's very hard to implement this. We did in the Dayton Accords, and it was reflected explicitly in the UN resolution. A good example of what didn't work is 1701 with Lebanon. There, we did set up what could have, I was with Condi at the Security Council when we did that resolution. Theoretically, that could have worked to secure the border between Israel and Lebanon and let them both live in peace. But then we went off to a UN, EU-led donors operation to rebuild a country that had no linkage with the actors adhering to the security provisions. And as a result, they got the country rebuilt. They didn't adhere to the security provisions, leading to another war. And then everything that was rebuilt and much more has now been blown up. So we got a bad example and a good example. That's the best I can do.
Thank you so much for providing those examples. I think those will provide a great pathway towards a better Syria. At least they'll be definitely helpful looking back what we made before and the mistakes and the right things that we've done. That's going to be quite important. And again, Mary, I'm going to turn to you with the same question about Europe's involvement in Syria and how it can potentially help with regards to governance and making daily life for Syrians better.
I will answer your question, but I would really like to highlight what Oula said just before, that the process should be led by Syrians, owned by Syrians, and European, US can only support, but really the Syrians are at the forefront. They have agencies, so that's where the real dynamic and power is. As for the Europeans, I think the tools they have is lifting sanctions and some kind of recognition or providing legitimacy to the new power. That's what they are really looking for. So engaging with them and agreeing on some kind of roadmap or pathway and steps they should accomplish in order to reach this stage of lifting sanctions and getting some legitimacy is probably where Europeans have more leverage. And another leverage is humanitarian aid. It's desperately needed right now in Syria. The European Union just announced that they're going to start a humanitarian bridge with Syria. So that's also where they can be helpful at the daily life level. So on governance, to answer your question, so that's could be part of this roadmap I was just telling you about, or process to ask for concrete commitment on governance, on inclusivity, and on the processes that Europe can weigh in. And I think that's absolutely key. Some are already calling for elections as part of the process, but to my opinion, this should be way further down the line. Elections are symbolic and are not going to solve things by themselves. So it's very important to get governance right before starting focusing on elections, and that might be a lesson learned from Iraq and other recent crises.
I may add quickly to what Mary said. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you. Yes, just want to highlight again, this is a process that needs to be led by Syrians themselves. And the Syrian civil society is strong, believe it or not. But we do need support. We do need humanitarian aid. We do need guidance and advice to engage with the world locally and internationally. So what I was trying to say is that statements alone like won't suffice. Like this is the time to engage directly with the with trusted members of the Syrian opposition, with leaders on the ground, obviously those who don't have blood on their hands. This is the time to use leverage, convey also some of the concerns that we have as international community, support, go there inside. Just like, I mean, the door is open now for anyone to go inside, document the human rights violations, the war crimes, talk to the people on the ground, talk to the opposition, talk to the leaders themselves. And yeah, this is the opportunity now to take advantage of. So yeah, Syria is going to always be led by Syrians. But we don't live alone in this planet. Obviously, everything that happens in Syria does not stay in Syria, as you all know. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add, and I totally agree with what Mary said as well on the European element, our allies here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. Unless anybody else wants to comment on what Ola and Marie said, I am going to turn to online questions because we have some questions online that we've been receiving. So I want to turn to those, but I want to start with Marissa because Marissa had a question too she wanted to ask. Go ahead, Marissa.
Yes, thank you so much, Yusuf, and thanks to all of you for all your very insightful comments. We kind of touched upon the Arab states, but I would be curious to hear a little bit more about how you envision the role of the GCC states in particular. As a reminder, there was a movement to normalize with Assad, not necessarily driven by all of the countries in the Arab world. So yeah, any comments on this would be much appreciated.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marissa. Ambassador Jeffrey, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is something Marissa and I have had some on-the-ground experience with. There's the good Arab approach and the bad Arab approach, characterized by, in the first category, Jordan, and the second, the UAE. The main effort to bring Syria in from the cold began with the UAE in 2019 or even earlier, and it reached its culmination in Syria's return to the Arab League. The UAE had two linked security interests, which I think most Arabs share. One is concern about the Iranian or Shia axis, shared by many other countries. Of course, the term coined by King Abdullah of Jordan. And secondly, the Emiratis, more than any other country I know of in the Arab world, except possibly Egypt, but I would say internationally, even more the Emiratis, detest not only Sunni Arab terrorism, but essentially Sunni Islamic movements of any sort, namely the Muslim Brothers, who are very active, among other places, in Syria in the opposition. And so they had an inclination to see Assad as a savior against them if Assad could be weaned from Iran. That was their mistake. It was never going to happen for reasons I could get into later. Iran, the Assad governance model, particularly after 2011, was to violently oppress the Sunni Arab majority. And he didn't have enough infantry, as we recently saw, to do that himself. He needed somebody, a partner, to kill Sunni Arabs. And there was no way the Arab states, the Sunni Arab states of the Middle East, were going to provide that capability, whereas Iran showed itself, if it could get what it wanted, namely support for Hezbollah, was perfectly happy to kill hundreds of thousands of Sunni Arabs, along with the Russians and Assad himself in Syria. Now, the good approach was Jordan, where Foreign Minister Safadi actually laid out conditions for Assad to meet for further integration, and pretty much was able to hold to them when Assad took absolutely no action. Very little happened beyond Assad coming into the Arab League. So also Jordan, of course, has very direct and concrete security and drug issues with Syria that have threatened its security. And therefore, I would hope that Jordan will play a strong role in the Arab League's approach. The Arabs need to speak with one voice. The voice I trust the most is Jordan's, both because it's most impacted of all the Arab states without Iraq, with the exception of Iraq, on the one hand, and it's had the most sensible policy on the other. Iraq, just a word on that. My whole assumption that Iraq was the new Lebanon and far more serious Lebanon because of its size and hydrocarbons wealth. Now I have to revisit because it's no longer sandwiched between Iran and Iran's biggest ally in the region. And it's now going to have policies that will work with a largely Sunni Arab dominated Syria. That's going to be really interesting. Watch that space. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Go ahead, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to add to this, first of all, I was in Doha last weekend when Arab countries met to respond to the rapid developments on the ground in Syria, and it was quite clear that no one knew what to do and how to react, and several countries didn't have a clear position defined on the ongoing developments. Then I think the priorities for Arab states are first stabilization and stabilizing the region. They are the second important point is that they are quite concerned with having a Sunni, more or less extremist power next door. Iraq is extremely concerned, and the Iraqis have started reinforcing their border with Syria. This weekend, Jordan is organizing a meeting with all the Arab states and the US to discuss the Syria situation. Yesterday, many Arab countries announced that their embassy in Damascus started resuming their work again, Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and etc. So, it's likely they're going to try to be pragmatic and establish some kind of relationship with the new authorities to accomplish their priority goal, which is stability and containing what is happening. Beyond that, and a more specific and detailed strategy, I think, hasn't been elaborated yet.
Thank you so much, Mary. Oula or Henri, if you want to answer that question.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question, and this was asked online as well. And by the way, please submit your questions on the live stream and wilsoncenter.org. But this question was asked several times. What's happening in Gaza right now? How would that potentially impact what could happen in Syria? Because Israel is part of the conversation in Syria as well. And obviously there are cultural ties between Gaza and West Bank and Syria and the broader region. So if anybody wants to take a hit at that question.
Look, the way I would look at it, I mean, to follow up on what Marie was trying to do at the beginning of our conversation, try to be optimistic in the sense that, look, the fact that Hezbollah, Iran, and now Assad have been taken out of the equation, you really do have a big political space that has opened up. And I'm a little bit worried that the Trump administration will just say, okay, forget it, we're not interested. But this is really the moment to engage, because you can actually build something when, partially because there's so much destruction, but also because you have opportunities and the number of threats that confronts you have come down. I mean, look at it from an Israeli perspective. Look, the trauma of October 7 has not left the Israelis. I mean, it's very clear. Forget about, I mean, the way they conducted the war in Gaza was awful, but what they did in Syria after the collapse of Assad is really a reaction to October 7, right? Because they don't want to have a situation where anybody can do that, especially when you have chemical weapons involved. But the problem is that with Bibi does everything to an excess. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know how to, right? And that partially, look, history is funny. I mean, sometimes leaders are can be very decisive. I mean, the wrong leader at the wrong time ends up creating real problems. So I think in some respects, you still have the wrong leader, if you want, in many countries. And but if if you had a visionary American government who could suggest a positive vision, I think people like Bibi also would fall by the wayside, because I mean we know he's not popular in Israel, but let's face it, when the Israeli army is ordered to do something, it has to do it. It's a civilian army, so this is unfortunately the problem. But that's, I mean, to come back to my point, this is really a very important opportunity. There hasn't been one like this in the Middle East in a very long time. And look, Trump can also take some shall we say, claim some victory, in the sense that the Abraham Accords are his. I mean, nobody will take them away from him. And those are also a building step to this process. I mean, they are very important to constructing something new.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I agree with Henri.
This is
and I'm pretty optimistic. First of all, I think we're very close to a ceasefire in Gaza. That will be encouraged by all these other developments because, as Henri pointed out, the Israeli military operation in Gaza was to eliminate, to the extent they could, totally a threat. Now, that can never be done, particularly an ideological threat. So therefore, there's a point of declining benefits of military action, and the Israelis have reached that. But more importantly, everything else in the region has made them much more secure because they no longer have to face attacks theoretically simultaneously on 7 fronts. We're down to about 1.5 fronts, if that. And so that gives Washington, be it the Biden administration in its last moments, but it's trying hard, or the Trump administration, the chance to seal a deal in Gaza. Once that's done, we, Washington, are in a better position to influence Israeli actions in Syria in a way that will provide long-term security for everybody, including the Syrian people, not just for Israel. And so these things are all connected. It's all good.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have other online questions. A number of people are curious about Turkey's involvement in Syria, because Turkey is one of the major players, has been one of the major players in Syria, and a number of actors in media, as well as analysts, experts, have argued that Turkey is one of the winners from the outside actors, if not one of the main ones, who has won, whose policies have been proven appropriate and correct. In number of media coverage. Do you think that this is the case for Turkey, for Ankara, for Erdogan government, or do you think there's reason to be cautious from Turkey's perspective, especially if it gets too deeply involved in Syria's internal business?
Can I answer?
Yes, of course.
Look, on paper, theoretically, the Turks are in the best position. They have the strongest economy. Syria will need to be rebuilt. And to the extent that the Turks were probably going to be kept out of Gaza's reconstruction, now they have another place to reconstruct, and the construction companies are pretty good. Mind you, they're all Erdogan cronies, but still, they are in a very good position in terms of transport routes, proximity, manufacturing sector capabilities, and so on and so forth. The thing that I think works against Turkey is A, this notion that they have won, B, that Erdogan will not know how to contain his ambitions, and this comes to the issue, obviously, of the Kurds. Look, they have pushed. I mean, one of the problems in Syria today is that you have the Syrian National Army, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Turkish government. No Syrian government can tolerate the existence of an outfit like this that will operate on its own independently of Damascus. HTS, yes, has some connection to Turkey, has worked with Turkey. SNA is part of the larger coalition that HTS also was part of it. But there's been a lot of tension between HTS and SNA in the past. So if they use the SNA more and more against the Kurds of Syria, there is going to be a backlash. I mean, let's not forget that when we talk about Syrian Kurds, we're talking about Syrians. We're not talking about Turkish citizens who live in Syria. And Syrian Kurds, people also tend to forget, really, for the longest time, suffered. Look, everybody suffered in Syria. I'm not trying to point out, but remember, 300,000 Syrian Kurds were suddenly denied citizenship. They can't go to school, they can't go to a hospital, they can't go to government office, they can't even leave the town they live in. Why? Because the Ba'ath regime decided to do that. So there has to be an accommodation between the Syrian Kurds and Damascus, and there will be one. The danger here, and where Turkey may miscalculate, and Erdogan tends to do that, unfortunately, is that he's going to interfere in the relationship between Damascus and the Kurds. And that's going to be very problematic.
Yeah, if I could just add, and this is a bit of a disagreement on the Kurds with Henri's comments and also his previous ones. He's downplaying a little bit the dual nature of the Syrian Kurds, or at least the Kurd. When we say the Syrian Kurds, typically we mean the YPG, PYD, Autonomous Administration, SDF. They go by many different names, which is part of the problem. They are both the Kurdish population of Syria, and thus can be, particularly as they are largely concentrated in one area, the northeast, although also in our friends, to the extent they haven't been ethnically cleansed from there. In the northwest, just like the Kurds of Iraq are in one area. That's a difference with the situation of Kurds in Turkey, and who are all over the place. And to the extent that they're the Kurdish population of Syria, the Iraq model works. The difference between the Kurds of Syria and the Kurds of Iraq, and the reason that, while Henri was right, that the Ankara was initially quite concerned about what we were doing with the Iraqi Kurds, Ankara learned to live with that pretty well, is that the Iraqi Kurds are not under the influence or control of the PKK. The main Syrian Kurdish movement is. It's relatively autonomous. It can make its own decisions, but it often takes decisions based upon what it gets out of the PKK in Kandil Mountain. And that's based upon many, many hundreds of hours of talking with these guys and trying to get them to do things that they would reasonably do to avoid problems with Turkey or to avoid better integration into Syria that they didn't do because they would run afoul of what their orders were out of Kandil. The most dramatic is Ilham Ahmed, who's one of the more well-known internationally figures. When she went up to Norway to attend a conference, found herself basically imprisoned in Kandil Mountain for several months afterwards because she was violating what they wanted to do. So there's only a certain limited amount of flexibility that Kurdish organization has, and to some degree, not to the same degree that the Syrian National Army is, but to some degree, they also are a foreign-dominated major political military force in Turkey, and that makes it a problem to deal with. It doesn't mean we can't deal with it, but it just means we have to be clear that they're not the Iraqi Kurds. They're the Syrian Kurds who are very closely aligned with the PKK.
Thank you, Ambassador. So we're coming close to the end of our panel, but I want to ask everybody to make their closing statements. Take it for a minute or two, if you will. I want to start with Mary, if that's okay with you.
Thank you. I think I will use my closing remark to add a quick thing on Turkey and just to add another layer of complexity. When we speak about an inclusive political process ahead, I think there is overall an agreement that Kurds need to be part of this process. But for the Kurds to be part of it, Turkey needs to accept it because it can block it easily and be a spoiler there. And it's unlikely to happen unless Turkey's concern regarding security, meaning the risk of attacks from the YPG, the PKK affiliates in Syria towards Turkey. So unless this risk is addressed. So this is a very complex question, but it cannot be dissociated from the political process and inclusiveness of the Kurds. So this needs to be taken into account.
Thank you, Marie. Henri, do you want to share your last thoughts?
Look, I just want to go back to something Jim said about Gaza. I mean, you can't completely eradicate something when it's an ideology. At the moment, when you're dealing with the Kurds of Syria, yes, the PKK ideology is a dominant one because it has proven to be successful. But at the end of the day, people, A, change their minds, two, conditions change, three, if they are going to be part of Syria, they have to compromise with Damascus. And if Kandil says don't compromise, they will compromise, and the people like Ilhan Ahmed will come up to the fore. And look, let's also face something else. I mean, the Turks also have to make concession to their own Kurds. I mean, the Kurdish language cannot be taught in Turkey. Give me a break. I mean, you have to also accommodate. And when people worry about the security concerns that the Turks have also have to make some steps toward their own minority, 20% of their population. No, stop here.
Thank you, Henri. Thank you so much. Ambassador Jeffrey?
First, I agree with Henri. My point is only that there is this PKK influence, not that. And as Henri made the point eloquently, it cannot be overcome. I not only think it can be, I think it will be, knowing many of the actors in northeast Syria. I'm actually pretty optimistic. It's just that the first step to achieving that optimism is recognizing who you're dealing with. Look, the 800-pound gorilla that we only touched on in passing twice is Donald Trump. Let me address that a little bit, having served in the Trump administration, beginning with his statement of last weekend, essentially, we don't have anything to do with Syria, stay out of it. This can be interpreted in two ways, and we had to do this during the first administration. First of all, he means this very clear when he's referring to our adventures in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Arab Spring, where we engaged massively militarily in largely unsuccessful, or only in Iraq, partially successful efforts to transform nation states over decades. That is an absolute forbidden area for him. He will not do it. Most of the American people won't. The other is, will he use American influence to shape actions? He certainly did in Syria. His famous orders to pull troops out was based upon the fact that the U.S. military kept saying the only purpose they were there was to fight ISIS. And after Raqqa fell, Trump felt that we had defeated ISIS and couldn't understand why we were keeping 900 troops on, and in this country that was full of wars and very complex. Because it was very hard for the military to communicate the reality, because it was we on the civilian side who were managing this, that the troops were exercising tremendous terrain dominance and pressure on Assad, pressure on the Iranians and such. When that was explained to him, he changed his mind and kept the troops on, and they're still there today. So it depends on how Trump interprets this statement, on how well the U.S. will do in the region, and frankly, how well Syria and a lot of other places will do in the next 4 years.
Thank you, Ambassador. Oula, I'm going to turn to you now, and Marissa is going to close after you.
Well, yeah, I do want to just quickly say that, of course, there is no free, democratic Syria without the Kurds. The Kurds actually have been one of the very first people to join the Syrian revolution, 2011, even before, like 2004. If you look back at that history of the Syrian Kurds and their uprising, people forget about that. Look it up. So yes, definitely, the Syrian Kurds are Syrians like any other. Like we have to be working together. The Syrian new government, transitional government, has to protect all minorities, everyone is equal under the law. To achieve that, it's going to be very complicated. Definitely, it's an extremely complex situation with the Turkish element and other regional players. But as I'm speaking as Syrians, like the Syrian people want to see a free Syria for all Syrians, including the Alawites, the Kurds, the Sunnis, the Christians, all the minorities, ethnic and religious. So just wanted to make that clear. I just want to say, since we're closing right now, congratulations to the Syrian people. Let's be optimistic, but also let's be involved and let's continue these conversations. These are the type of conversations that Syrians need to hear as well. We need to be providing them advice. We need to help them rebuild their country. So let's do it. And Syria is free. It's a new chapter. Let's also focus on that. Let's also respect and understand how difficult the past 60 years have been for Syrians. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marissa, floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a very quick note to thank our expert panelists. We always appreciate your insight and bringing in your expertise and your deep knowledge and work on the region and in the region. As Oula mentioned, these are very important discussions, and the Wilson Center's Middle East program is committed to continue these discussions. There's a lot unraveling in Syria that is catching everybody's breath across the region, but also here in Washington. And we will always be committed to ensuring that voices from Syria and from the Syrian diaspora are always represented on our panels and in our discussions. And thank you once again. And lastly, but not least, thanks to Yusuf for moderating today's discussion. And thanks to our external relations team for yet another seamless online event. And tune in for more and follow us on social media to learn more about our upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you.